Hey guys, it's Quentin Figueroa with Slayerment.com, and we're going to be talking about not real socialism and other excuses that socialists make. Because that's basically what socialism is it's a victim ideology where the people in it make excuses when things go wrong rather than taking responsibility for them. You see this with people all the time where if they make excuses, they never really grow from them or learn from them, become better, and they just kind of keep placing the blame on something else and never really registers with them so that they can improve themselves. So, for instance, if I'm starting a business, I might have a little bit of a plan of what I want to do, and I might break it down into steps. And let's say this business has 2 steps. Now, if in order to get to step 2, I need to first complete step 1, and maybe step 1 is a really bad step or it's something that will never work or it won't let me get to step 2, but I don't know that. As a business, I don't get to say, I never attempted my business because I never got to step 2. Right? So if step 2 is the end goal of my business being completed and step 1 is preventing me from getting there, I don't get to say, I never attempted my business because I never got to step 2. And yet this is what socialists do all the time to varying degrees. And let's look at an example with that right now. So I'm sure you may have heard of the term state capitalism. Socialists love talking about state capitalism. Right, so when the USSR failed, it was because of state capitalism, right? So it puts the blame on capitalism and not socialism because we're talking about state capitalism. It has capitalism in the word, right? Now, that term, if we look at it, it's a term that was most likely created by Vladimir Lenin. And if you actually read what he writes about when he's describing it, you can see that like the business I was talking about previously, where it might have multiple steps, state capitalism is a step towards creating communism, right? So it's a step to get there, and it was a step that Lenin wanted to use to get to communism in the USSR, and he writes about it. So let me quote him. Quote, "Now try to substitute for the junker capitalist state, for the landowner capitalist state, a revolutionary democratic state, i.e., a state which in a revolutionary way abolishes all privileges and does not fear to introduce the fullest democracy in a revolutionary way. You will find that, given a really revolutionary democratic state, state monopoly capitalism inevitably and unavoidably implies a step, and more than one step, towards socialism." Right? So, and there's other quotes in his writing where he's talking about state capitalism and how it's a step to get to socialism, which then gets to communism, right? Because that's basically kind of for this USSR implementation, that was the strategy going in, right? So they had the current state of Russia. They wanted to change it to state capitalism, which is put everything into a state-controlled entity that they could then hand over to the workers, right? That's how they wanted to do their communism. Terrible idea, if you think about it, but that was their idea, which is a bad idea, right? So that was the strategy, and it's obvious why it won't work. People know that putting power in a state is one of the dumbest things you can do because the state's just going to use that power against you. People aren't always honest. People aren't going to do what you want them to do. Like when you concentrate power, it's always a bad idea. It always ends up terrible. I mean, that's what history shows us, right? So when you call it state capitalism, when state capitalism is a term that socialists created, and it's a step towards communism, towards socialism, that's a very dishonest thing to do because it has nothing to do with capitalism. That's part of your plan. You socialists, right? The socialist faction under Lenin, they wanted to do that. So you can't blame capitalism when your socialism experiment fails. That was your step. It was part of your strategy was create something called state capitalism. I mean, it's really state socialism. But either way, it's retarded because we know creating a state and then expecting it to give it over and then to give up their control, you know it's not going to work. So it's a very dishonest and manipulative thing to even use the concept of state capitalism as a reason for the USSR failing. That's a cover word for socialism because that's a step they created. Capitalists didn't have anything to do with it. It was Vladimir Lenin creating state socialism, thinking it was a good idea. That's socialists creating a plan for socialism, right? And fortunately, some socialists have learned from that, and they understand that trying to create socialism by giving more power to the state is a bad idea, and maybe you're better off not doing that, right? So you have more anarchist type socialists who don't want to go that way, and they want to kind of go a different way without creating the state first. They'd rather just do it all outside of the state, that type of way. But how you actually achieve socialism without some type of central authority that manages, say, voting and these types of things is, I think, a challenge for a lot of socialists. And that's something to talk about in a different video. But I just want to mention some socialists, fortunately, have learned from it. And they know that that's kind of a bad idea. But for the socialists that don't take responsibility for that or get that, it's just totally, it's manipulative and it's bad history and it's just kind of rude. It's weird to not take responsibility. But again, that's kind of the thing socialists do, is they make excuses outside of socialism when things go astray, right? So yeah, that method for the USSR didn't work. And there are newer methods, but of course, those are still going to have problems and they still go astray. And we'll kind of look at that in a sec here, but it's a common trend with socialists when things go bad to just say, like, that wasn't socialism, that wasn't us, that wasn't real socialism, right? I'm sure you've probably heard it before, which is why you're checking out this video. So, since we don't have 100% socialism anywhere, the problems are never the result of socialism, right? Because socialists say, since we don't have 100% socialism, we never get to see how it would have worked if we got there, as if that is somehow a reason why we can't critique or analyze or figure out whether or not socialism is a good idea, right? Because of course, we don't have 100% capitalism anywhere either, right? There's lots of varying degrees of capitalism, socialism, and other components that make up all societies throughout the world. And yet we are still able to look at capitalism, look at kind of the major tenets of capitalism, like private property, look at some of the major tenets of socialism, like worker control over the means of production and the abolition of private property. And we can see how we can measure whether or not these are good ideas, whether or not it's going to be good for society, whether or not you could actually ever get socialism by getting rid of private property and things like this, right? So you don't need to have 100% socialism to analyze it. That's just like an excuse again. I mean, that's what they do. They make excuses. So I think so the main tenet of socialism, so one of the things they say is worker control over the means of production. But the even deeper thing, I think beyond that, which most of them would agree with, is the abolition of private property. They don't like the institution of private property itself, right? So they want to get rid of that. That's kind of the main beef. And it's funny because if you look at that, what happens when you get rid of private property? It always creates problems. It's a bad idea to get rid of private property. And so when you have capitalism, which promotes private property, you can see how private property creates wealth and a higher standard of living and a better society for people. That's why capitalist societies do pretty freaking well. And then when you destroy private property and you get rid of it, you can see how you generally become poorer. Things become worse. There's more corruption. People don't care as much. It creates all these kind of disincentives and problems in society that then socialists will use as excuses for problems rather than blaming the actual abolition of private property itself. Because when you don't have private property, you're going to have more violence, you're going to have rivalry, you're going to have problems knowing how to even manage the resource, the property, whatever. It's not clear. It's like an outdated. It's like going backwards in time rather than forward. Private property brings us civilization and allows us to move forward. But socialists don't want private property. They want common ownership of things. They don't even want ownership of things, right? But they just want to take away the private property and it's a bad idea. I mean, it doesn't work, and you don't need 100% socialism to measure whether or not that works. We can see degrees of it in all different types of societies, right? Yeah, and it's interesting because when you remove private property, you're going to create fractures in society. And when you create a fracture in society, there's going to be something that kind of fills that void, like some type of corruption or politician or something. And when that's filled, socialists, being kind of the naive way they are, they blame the effect, right? The thing that fills that fracture that they created, but they don't actually blame the cause. The cause of that is the abolition of private property, right? Whether you give it to the state or some non-state entity or whatever, it doesn't matter. Getting rid of private property is a bad idea. It doesn't matter who you give it over to or how you do it. It's a bad idea. So it creates some type of fracture when you do that, and socialists inevitably are going to blame the bad dictator or the person that takes control or the economic problem that happens because of it. They're going to blame an oil shortage, anything besides the removal of private property itself. It's very basic. You're blaming an effect, but you're not blaming the cause. And the cause is something that socialism is creating. So it's just bad analysis and understanding of what even is going on. And so yeah, it's an endless loop of some type of private property being destroyed, something coming in and creating problems because of it, and then that something getting blamed rather than the destruction of private property itself. That's how it goes. And they also, of course, ascribe the problems to capitalism. As you see with state capitalism, that's not even a capitalist term. Capitalism is private property in the hands of entities that are not the state. So state capitalism is an oxymoron by definition. It's just, and of course, it takes a socialist to create an oxymoronic term like that. And so state capitalism is just a totally absurd thing, but they blame things on capitalism. They ascribe problems to capitalism. So it's like bad data analysis. You're not understanding of what the problem really is. So you just blame it on capitalism because that's an easy scapegoat to blame it on. And socialism, it requires a host, right? Because you never see socialist societies that just start from scratch. Like America and a lot of capitalist societies, they pretty much start from scratch and they just build from the ground up, and it's kind of a slow evolution of a higher standard of living, more wealth, more capital, and these types of things. With socialism, since of course it doesn't really work, it doesn't grow. It can't create wealth. It can only take wealth, and it starts to destroy those wealth-creating agents and entities as it grows, right? So it's like a parasite. And capitalism is the host. Capitalism, it creates something good, and then socialists say, okay, we can take this thing that capitalism created and now do something with it, right? So it's like a short-term parasitic strategy where they just come in and eat up capitalism. And then as things get worse, they ironically blame capitalism when they're the ones that are destroying capitalism. It's so naive and manipulative and just weird, but that's what is going on with this, right? And so when you're researching it, and when socialists are looking at what's going on in Cuba or Venezuela or the USSR or all these other places that have varying degrees of socialism, but more so heavy on socialism than a lot of the Western world, like Europe and America. So when you have these more socialist places, the socialists, they are convinced in their head that socialism works and that it's the best thing, or that it's at least better than capitalism. They're convinced that it's good, right? So it's kind of like a religion to them where they know it's right. So when something goes wrong, they don't have the capacity of allowing it to be socialism because they're convinced that it's correct. So they have to blame capitalism or something else, right? They know that socialism is right, so it's like a religion to them. And it's a confirmation bias that skews the way they analyze data, right? So when they look at history, current events, they have this skewed way of looking at it because it goes into them, and the confirmation bias does not allow socialism to ever be the cause of a problem. It has to be something else. And so you get, people that keep blaming other things other than socialism. It's same with just somebody who is blaming things other than themselves. They're convinced that their poverty or their problems or their challenges, their inability to do anything they want to do is not because of them, but it's because of where they were born. It's because of the parents they had. It's because of the environment they're in, because of anything other than themselves, anything other than their choices. And this is a very kind of poor mentality, not poor in the sense of finance, but poor in the sense of bad, destructive way to live. It's not a very wise way to look at your life, right? And that's what's going on with socialism. So have we had socialism? Has socialism been tried? Of course it has been. It's been tried in many different places, and it has failed in every place that it has been, right? And yeah, of course, maybe it works for the short term, but you could go take a rich person, take all his money, and you're gonna have money for a while, but once it's all gone, you don't create more wealth, right? So anybody can do something in the short term and destroy or use a resource. That's improve anything. Whether you can create wealth, make people richer, improve the standard of living, that's a whole other thing. And socialism, very, very, very far from being able to do that. So yeah, did it go as planned? No. And of course it didn't go as planned. Nothing does, right? When America was started, did America go as planned? Did the Revolutionary War, did it just win itself? Was it just over then? And then once America finally was free from Britain, was that the end of it? No. Freaking the War of 1812 happened almost immediately. You have banks being set up, from overseas bankers. So it's like, it's never over. It's never easy. And there's always problems. So what? That's the purpose of having a system that is anti-fragile, that is not going to get fractured at any type of stress that it has, right? So any type of problem and your system gets screwed, that's not a very good system now, is it? And that's why when capitalism is implemented, it usually does okay and is able to kind of overcome challenges and problems and grow. And we see, nations adopting capitalist concepts, free market type principles, and they usually do pretty well because of that. And can't quite say the same thing for socialism because it requires like a perfect sterile environment to get set up, but then it still never works anyway, and then it's just more excuses. It's the same thing. So even when you're starting a business, has there ever, ask any businessman, is it ever the right time to start a business? No. It's like starting a business is never easy. It's never like, oh, things are just going to go perfect. Everybody's just going to buy our product and accept what we're doing. And there's going to be no challenges. And it's just, this is all, because it's so smart, it's just going to work. It's like, no, that's not how it works. There's challenges from day one, and the challenges never go away. And you just have to keep taking it in, thinking about it, figuring out what you need to do, adapting, changing, learning, researching, these types of things, right? So it's no different with a society. You don't just get to say that we had challenges and it didn't work and we got screwed because of the environment. And it's like, no, capitalism's able to do it with bad environments. You just got to have a better system. You got to have a better implementation strategy and these types of things. You can't use that excuse. It's just, come on. So yeah. And that again is why socialism never starts from scratch, because their implementation strategy is to take over something that's already working rather than to build something working from scratch, because it can't. That's why it's like a parasite, and capitalism is like a host. And their strategy is to go from capitalism to socialism, not to go from nothing to socialism, because it's hard to go from nothing to socialism if you can't create wealth. Now, being more of an entrepreneur businessman, I look at this like an investment. And most people are very bad at making good investments. That's why a lot of people are poor, right? I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's very hard to make a good investment. It takes a lot of research, so it takes more than anything. It takes kind of like an instinct, but not even that. It takes a wisdom, right? It takes like an experienced understanding to where you're not naive, to where you can kind of see into the future where other people can't. And that's how you make good investments. And I don't think most socialists can do that. I think it's a personal thing of a lot of socialists where they kind of can't see into the future, or they are a little bit naive and they don't quite have experience. And that's why I think once people like socialists might become more entrepreneurial or just older, they start to kind of change and say like, yeah, I kind of get how things work now. It's not so like just cookie cutter, like this is the way the world works. It's way more nuanced. And it's there's a lot more going on to things, right? So it's like socialists have lots of opinions on kind of what will work, but it's like it doesn't matter if it doesn't have any traction, or if it doesn't hold any weight. It's like somebody coming to you telling you all these investment ideas. Oh, I'm so smart. This is how you invest. This is what you should do with your money. Yet they're poor. They've never done well with investments, yet they're trying to tell you how to invest. It's like, why am I listening to you? What do you have to offer? And that's what I see with socialists. It's like they're trying to tell you what a good investment is, yet they themselves have proven nothing. Yet the capitalists have proven, obviously, how to do the best societies we have right now. So it's like, why? Who do you want to listen to? Why would you even listen to what they're saying? I mean, listen to it, sure. But to act on it is just naive. It's just stupid, because if you're able to see through it, it's no different than like being able to see a good investment. You see kind of where it's going to lead. You can look at current bodies of motion that are happening throughout the world, and you can see where they're going to go. And the wiser person, the person who's more wise and experienced, is going to be able to see further into the future. They're going to see further where these bodies of motion lead, where the socialists are not going to do this because they don't have the foresight to do that. And that's kind of what it takes. So yeah, I see it like just they're like an investment. They're bad at investing. It's like, why do I care about this? Right? Because socialism, it has many problems. There's kind of three big ones that I always come to. But it'd probably be better to go through that in another video, because this isn't really a critique of socialism. But I think just people in general, when they understand kind of what socialism is trying to do, if they have some world experience and have worked with other people and done things, they kind of get that. Like, socialism has an incentive problem. And I think people can look at socialism. They might not know exactly how to term it, what the term is, or how to phrase it, but they can see that if you're trying to equalize things, it's going to create incentive problems where the people who do more aren't going to want to work as hard, and the people who do less are going to kind of get things for free. And it creates an incentive problem where you start to get an overall decline in work and output and quality, right? So there's an incentive problem, there's an economic calculation problem, where it's hard to do prices and stuff in socialism. So it's like you don't know how much of something or how little of something to do. And then there's a knowledge problem. So socialism has kind of three big problems. It has lots of other problems and problems that stem from these problems. And people that at least have a little of experience or wisdom kind of see this immediately, right? And they might not know the technical terms of it, or they might not know the technicalities of it, but they get like, this can't work and it's just kind of silly. And that's what happens with investments and this type of thing also, where you just kind of can know through experience, like, yeah, why are they spending so much money on their office and this appearance stuff when they don't actually have a product that people want, or they're not doing something people need, or, it's like you can kind of see all the different attributes and synthesize an analysis that may or may not make sense. And socialists, when you look at the data and when you look at everything they're saying and you compare it to something like capitalism, which of course capitalism, not perfect, but far superior to socialism when you kind of look at it and see what's going on. So yeah, there's that. So yeah, of course socialists, they have their technical rebuttals and their ways of kind of like, they'll have again, it's excuses. They'll have an excuse for anything. But just because you say something doesn't mean it's accurate. Like anybody can say, if you were to take 100 people, like 99 of them, or I don't know, 95 of them, something, they're going to give you an opinion on where to put your money. But maybe only one of them might have a good, accurate response. So it's like, just because people are saying things, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean it's accurate. It doesn't mean it has weight. So of course people are going to have rebuttals, but that rebuttal only satisfies their level of understanding. And if you're at a higher level of understanding, or you're more wise or able to see further into the future, that rebuttal is not going to satisfy you. And it probably won't satisfy them once they become more mature or evolved or, higher in their understanding. It won't satisfy them either. But for the time being, it does satisfy them, and that's why they're a socialist, or that's why somebody is investing and losing money at that level. It's like your information that you have is at the level that you are. And if you're giving a response that satisfies you, it doesn't mean it's going to satisfy a less naive person or that it's accurate, right? So it's like, who cares if you have a response? It's like, that doesn't matter. What matters is the accuracy of what you're doing and kind of the results and the effects of it, right? So so I see most socialists as just naive and experienced. They nitpick little details, but they miss the big picture. In other videos, I kind of talk about stuff like this, like an S versus an N, a sensor versus an intuitive person in the MBTI. Or you could even break it down into RK selection theory, where, R people versus K people. And there's this kind of different modes that people are, or the way they are, based on lots of different things. But that's, socialists are in kind of this one group in a way, and it makes sense to kind of what's going on and why they're believing what they're believing, because that's kind of where they're at. And socialists, they'll see kind of something wrong with capitalism, rightfully so. There's lots of problems, but then they'll want to kind of remove the whole system and replace it with something far inferior. And that's just, it's not wise, right? So you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Capitalism, it has problems, but you don't remove capitalism completely and expect to have things work well, especially with socialism. And that's kind of the problem. It's like anybody can poke holes at something because it's very easy to find faults in the world. What's hard to do is to find coherent and accurate solutions that actually solve problems and make the world a better place. And if you research socialism and capitalism and just everything in general, you look at society, history, and things like this, socialism has yet to create a superior product than capitalism. And you can see that both historically and theoretically. And that is the problem with socialism. And it's just weird how people will say it's not real socialism and that it's never been tried, and that they're as if that is the argument. And that is not going to hold any weight to like a thinking capitalist or a thinking person who is able to kind of weigh things in a more full way, and it's just not as naive. So socialism hasn't been working historically. It doesn't make sense rationally or intellectually. So it's just got a lot of problems. And until these problems are going to be reworked, we're never going to see real socialism. And by the time we do see real socialism, it probably won't even be socialism anymore. So I don't know what to tell you guys. That's my thoughts on not real socialism, and that is what I'm going to say. So if you like this video, please subscribe to the channel. Please share it with your friends. Please comment and this type of thing. I plan on producing lots and lots more on lots of different topics. And if you have any topics in general that you'd want me to talk about, I'd be happy to do so. I'm into lots of different things. I like philosophy. I really like business type stuff. I have a business and I've created multiple businesses. So I like talking about business. I like philosophy. I really like talking about religion and spirituality and these types of things. I like talking about how that ties into business. So there's lots of things I like talking about. Let me know if you're interested. And thank you very much, guys, and have a great day.